This episode of the BloodStream Podcast, and every episode of the BloodStream Podcast, is brought to you by Shire. And for that we say, as always, thank you, Shire.
Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, episode 29, October 22nd, 2018. I'm Natalie Lynch, and I am here at the National Hemophilia Foundation's 70th Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference. This year, it's held at the World Center Marriott in sunny Orlando, Florida. Unfortunately, on this month's episode, my partner in crime and partner in pod, Mr. Patrick James Lynch, will not be co-hosting due to his myriad of responsibilities here at the conference. But I should have some cool guest hosts pop in and out as I explore this weekend. So whether you were here at the conference and unable to attend all the sessions and events you wanted to, or you couldn't make it this year, this month's episode should make you feel like you were right here with me. My hope's to bring you highlights, small interviews, I'm going to attend some spouse and partner sessions, and generally give you the flavor of this year's annual meeting. Aside from conference coverage this month, we're also going to hear from community member Ben Martin in our Share segment. All that and more, welcome to BloodStream. So I just walked into the exhibit hall. It is mayhem in here. There are booths after booths of activities, food. There is a huge buffet of wonderful foods set up. Yeah, it's awesome. I just walked over to the BloodStream booth where Avra and Ryan are talking to a lot of people, telling them about this podcast. It's really exciting. As soon as I walked in, I saw Janie White-Ginder, I saw Lori Kelly, all these usual suspects of the bleeding disorder community are here, and it's a great buzz, a lot of excitement. I'm gonna continue walking around. All right. So I just walked back over to the BloodStream booth, and I'm here with Avra. Say hi, Avra.
Hey, how's it going?
So, Avra, how busy has the booth been? The exhibit hall just opened. Has there been a mad rush of people over here, or let me know how it's been.
Right when it opened, there was definitely like a different energy in the room, and people are flocking over and seeing our posters and seeing our bags and being like, what is this stuff? And it's definitely a wide range of people. Some people have never even heard of what a podcast is, and some people are like, oh my gosh, I listen to that every day. So it's really interesting to get to talk to people about it and see what their opinion is on all this podcast stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of frenetic energy in here and a lot of excitement, and I think people are just excited to be here at the conference, so I'm glad the booth's set up, and we'll introduce more people to this podcast. Thanks, Avra. So I'm here with Justin Levesque, who has a blood work exhibit. Justin, tell us more about this exhibit.
So Bloodwork is an art exhibition that's been going on at the NHF annual meeting for 5 years now. This is the 5th exhibition we've had, and it is a call for art from community members. You don't have to be affected with the bleeding disorder yourself, but as long as you're part of the community. And then we show that art on display in the exhibit hall. And I think it's just a nice opportunity to acknowledge, an additional form of success in terms of creativity. It's sort of the flip side to, achieving success with your body in a physical way.
Absolutely. So if someone listening wanted to produce something for next year, how would they go about contacting you or getting it in the exhibit? What's that process like?
Yeah, so we run the whole program underneath this kind of program guide called FOLX, which is spelled FOLX. And if you go to folx.org, so FOLX.org, you can learn more about some of the programs we do and about how to participate in a bloodwork exhibition in the future.
Awesome. And what type of work? Like, is it limited to just visual arts, or is it I mean, I know it's visual arts, but like sculpture, painting. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, actually, it's more than just visual art. We include music in the show as well. We have the Blood Vibrations Listening Center, which you can watch like music videos or also, hear people, some rap songs, some country songs. I mean, that's pretty cool, like interactive part of the show. But when it comes to other kinds of art, really anything goes. Like, I think craft is art, like, beading is art, crochet, embroidery, photography, painting, collage. I mean, anything I think that you are using your mind to like think about or problem solve around is really the kind of creativity that we want to be able to show. One time we exhibited photos of someone's tiny house that they built because that process, was creative in a building kind of way, So anything goes as long as you're kind of expressing yourself in what you're doing, I guess.
That's awesome. And I love tiny houses. I mean, who doesn't? They're so cool.
Definitely.
So, and you said you don't have to be a person affected with a bleeding disorder. So you can be a parent or a spouse or a sibling.
Yeah, any of those I think are perfect. I think that those experiences are important in terms of making sure that they're visible as well. I think one of the goals of the exhibition is to try to give a voice and a place and a visibility to folks who maybe are marginalized even within the community of bleeding disorders. I think for me, the biggest reason why I began this was when I developed an inhibitor about 6 years ago and sort of thinking about the inhibitor community as not really having a defined place within the bleeding disorders community and how physical success was not really on the cards, part of the equation in terms of what could maybe be accomplished, and sort of thinking about creativity or about different kinds of successes that maybe didn't rely so much on the body. And so that's sort of one of the goals is to make those sort of invisible folks more seen or have a place to be seen in some way.
That's awesome. So if you didn't have a chance to check it out this year, you can check it out next year. And if you were unable to make it this year, it's blood work, and you have a whole year to get creative and submit a piece. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us, Justin. And thank you. All right, right now I am outside the 4th annual Teen Impact Awards, honoring 71 teens affected by bleeding disorders. Let's go inside. All right, so I got one of the best seats in the house. I'm next to Josh Gordy, and this is your second time doing the Teen Impact Awards, second year in a row, is that right?
Second year. I was blessed to be invited back, so hopefully I do a good job again this year.
Are you nervous?
No, last year I was pretty nervous. This year I think I've got a little more comfortable, It's just all about having fun, being yourself.
So you're a seasoned performer and you're ready to go up there and perform.
Oh yeah, ready to perform, put on a great show. Honor these teens. It's for them, obviously, and just have a great time.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. I've asked nothing about the show because I want to watch it with fresh eyes. So I'm excited to see what's in store. Have fun up there.
Thank you.
So I am here with one of the Teen Impact Award nominees tonight, award recipient, actually. What's your name?
Sebastian Rodriguez.
And Sebastian, what did you get your award in tonight?
I got it for academic achievement, specifically for my participation in extracurricular activities.
And what was your experience receiving that? What did receiving that award mean to you?
I came in tonight nervous. There have been things that had interrupted me coming here, but I got here, and finally getting out here and meeting some people really calmed me down, and I got up on that stage and I received my award and I poured my heart into what I talked about, and it was really wonderful. It was like nowhere near as stressful as I thought it was going to be, and it's been an amazing experience, and I'm so blessed to have received this award, and tonight has been an amazing night. So
awesome. Yeah, I mean, the reason I came over to grab you and speak to you specifically is you really impressed me with what you said. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about what you said up there?
I talked about how my participation in extracurricular activities, specifically student council and Model United Nations, has molded my practical abilities, negotiation, communication, etc. But I closed it off, making my point that the main thing that I've gained in my 4 years of high school from participation and involvement has been friendship, and that some of my best memories that I've ever had have been made in these extracurricular activities, being able to travel far to places like New York and Charlottesville to go to extracurricular activities. And I've made some of my best friends there. And I said that, if you are younger than me and you're not yet involved, do not hesitate. You have to get involved. You will not regret getting involved. It's less of a job and more of an opportunity. And I know from personal experience that if you wait, you will regret it.
And I just thought that was so important. I mean, I was pretty involved in my high school, and it really formed my high school experience. How does your involvement help with your bleeding disorder in terms of management or just, being a person in the world with a bleeding disorder, being a teen in the world with a bleeding disorder?
It helps me feel a bit more included when I feel like I'm left out, when people just don't understand. It can be very excluding. It can be, demeaning. And by involving myself in these clubs, I put myself into a community. I put myself into a group where we all have a common goal, and all of that's pushed aside, and we can work together, for instance, in Model UN, to try to make a difference in the world.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me, and enjoy your night. It's just the beginning of a really awesome weekend, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I am here with James Cosman, another recipient of the Teen Impact Award. James, what was your experience tonight?
I was kind of nervous because everyone was saying that they had questions asked at them, and I wasn't aware of that, so I was really freaking out. And then I figured that if they called on me, I'd improvise. And I just kind of dealt with it. It was scary, but it felt amazing.
I mean, you looked great up there. You looked calm, composed, and I couldn't tell you were improvising at all. Do you want to share with our podcast audience a little bit about what you set up there?
So what I said was basically what they told me about Alcatraz is that I would be eaten by sharks. And I told them that I just had to be faster than the slowest person because the sharks is going to go for the slowest meal, not the fastest.
So our podcast audience knows you swam from where to where?
So I swam from Alcatraz Island back to San Francisco Bay, which is about 1.5 miles if you go in a straight line, which I didn't. I kind of went in a curve, so it was about 3 miles for me.
And how long does it take someone to swim from Alcatraz Island to San Francisco?
For me, it took It took me 1 hour and 30 minutes.
I mean, that's amazing. That an hour 13.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. And were you nervous at any point about say sharks?
I didn't get nervous till I was on the boat, and the boat won't take you back, so you have to jump off the boat and you have to swim back. So at that point, it was kind of too late for me to turn back, and I think that was actually good for me because it allowed me to get over the nervousness.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And it was just so wonderful seeing everyone up there tonight, and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm also here with James's sister. What's your name? Gracie, watching your brother go up there tonight and receive an award, what was that experience like for you?
I'm proud for him. I mean, not many kids his age these days get to do that.
Thank you so much, Gracie. And I'm here also with Dad. Okay. Joshua Cosman, James's dad. What was it like? I didn't want to assume you were his father or, there's a lot of people here, it's 2018. There's all kinds of families. So what was it like to see James up there?
It's a very proud moment for me as his father. When I live with him, he does all this stuff for the community, bleeding disorders and non-bleeding disorder community involvement. So it's just one of the things that he's always done and always wanted to do. So we don't really see it as a recognition issue. He just does it. So for him to be nominated by somebody else and to be recognized in this manner it means a lot to me as a parent. And just the fact that he's so humble about it, it makes him really stand out.
Yeah, he's a very, very special kid, and you should be very proud. Thanks for talking with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'm here at the Teen Impact Awards with a very proud mama. What's your name?
Yasmin.
And Yasmin, who are your two wonderful children that are here?
Farah and Porus.
And who was recognized tonight?
Farah.
And what was the impact on you being here for the second year in a row at the Teen Impact Awards?
This is very inspiring for my kids, both my teenagers. My son can't wait to do something, make an impact in the community because he wants to come up here and get an award from Patrick. He loves the show. He loves how every year it's different, and this is exciting, and he can't wait. And it is very inspiring for my daughter because what she started as a social studies project for her 8th grade. She started a local walk in the community to raise awareness and funds, and she wants to continue it till she graduates from high school.
Which is amazing, right? You know, to watch your children come up with an idea and feel truly inspired from within. You must be so very proud.
I am. Thank you.
Well, thanks for chatting with me. All right, it is Friday morning here at NHF's annual meeting, and I am sitting here with Mrs. Jessica Bombardier, wife of Chris Bombardier, mountaineer extraordinaire. Jessica, how do you feel about being introduced as Chris's wife?
I think at this point I'm kind of used to it. I had someone come up to me the other day and say, "Oh, you're Mrs. Chris." And I remember looking down at my name tag thinking, does it say that on there somewhere? But I'm kind of used to it at this point, and it's actually really nice to be so closely associated with him. I'm proud of the man.
As you should be. Well, I think it's interesting, right? As a spouse or a partner of a person with a bleeding disorder, when we're in this community, there is sort of a loss of personal identity. So it's like, oh, you're Patrick's wife, or oh, you're Chris's wife. And it's like, well, I'm many other things too. My name's Jessica, or my name is Natalie. So I think it's interesting. And so Jessica's here with me to go attend some sessions today. And we decided we were going to attend a lot of the ones for spouses. And I actually was impressed looking at the program. I feel like I've been to a couple of these in the past years, and the partners and spouse track was not as robust as it seems this year. And I was always disappointed in the past, being like, this is an opportunity where a bunch of us are together in a space and we face so many of the same challenges. Like, there should be opportunities for us to get together and talk about those things. And Jess and I have become close friends over the last year, and it is just like personal in our friendship, discussing things where it's like, oh yeah, you too? That's, so there's a lot of it. But what sessions are you looking forward to today?
Well, actually, I had highlighted a bunch of the spousal programs in the catalog, and there's a couple on just communication between you and your significant other. And so I think that that's going to be fascinating and hopefully give us some insight into maybe some tips and tricks that we can try, or maybe even just be able to commiserate with some other spouses in what they go through. And I think it'll be a little cathartic as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's interesting too is when you're a partner with someone with a health concern, there's that gray line of being a partner and a spouse and crossing the line into caregiver or martyr, or, it gets complicated, right? So it will be nice to be here at NHF this weekend, meeting other people and exploring. So we're going to head downstairs. Wanted to head down earlier, and we just ended up sitting up here in the room catching up, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's 10 a.m. and we're missing some of these really fun sessions. So we will bring you into the sessions and hopefully talk about them either together afterwards, or maybe get some interviews with other people who were there. And so stay tuned as we move through the day. So So I just came out of Mental Health First Aid, How to Ask, Are You Okay? And it was led by speaker Debbie De La Riva, who this year, after Barry Hardy's suicide, took a training in mental health first aid. This was an amazing, amazing session, and one that should definitely be repeated. I felt very lucky to attend. So Debbie went through the 5 steps of first aid for mental health with everyone. And Debbie's with me right now. Debbie, do you mind just telling our audience what those 5 steps are? And when we did the exercise of going through those 5 steps, the group that I was with, Heather Michaels and Jessica Bombardier, we had a couple of questions. They're great steps, but challenges that might come up is if you're talking with someone who hasn't acknowledged that they're struggling, or has acknowledged and isn't ready to talk about it. So what are the 5 steps, and how would you deal with a situation like that of someone who's not acknowledged or isn't ready to talk about it?
Definitely. Thank you so much for being able to talk to you about this, because for the first time I've been able to mold my 2 worlds together, hemophilia and mental health. Mental Health First Aid is a program where I'm certified to teach other people how to recognize the signs of depression, anxiety, common disorders, and how to have that conversation. The question you were asking about is the 5-step action plans, and they stand for the first letter, ALGEE, ALGE. And what they stand for is for assist of suicide and harm, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance and information, encourage professional help, and encourage support strategies and self-help. What this is about is that you are that person that is with somebody when they're in psychological distress until they actually do open up or get out of denial and get the type of help that they need. But a lot of times we know that the people that with mental illness, they're usually the last ones to know the signs and symptoms we see. And so if someone's not prepared to talk to you about it, or they're defensive, or you're not the right person for them to talk to, you want to make sure that they're safe. So everybody should know about the suicide prevention hotline and put it in their phones. And that is 1-800-273-TALK. That's one thing you can give to somebody who is not prepared to talk about it.
So if I'm going through down the 5 steps and I realize that I'm engaging with someone who's not ready or willing to discuss this, that I can at least give them a tool and walk away knowing that I went through the 5 steps, I gave them a tool, and that was the best. I did the best I could in that situation, and then maybe follow up is, just to see if maybe they talk to someone else or...
Definitely, because I was referring to someone that's in a mental health crisis, and then you have a lot of other people, they're just going through psychological distress, but they don't want to talk about it, acknowledge it, or they don't want to talk to you about it. So really, you're that person to say, I see you. I see you're in pain, and I just want to let you know that in the future, if you want to talk to me, I'll always be here for you. Or who else in your life you think you can talk to right now. The other important thing to know about mental health crisis is that in many major metropolitan areas, when you call the police department and you're working with someone in a mental health crisis, be sure and ask for the crisis intervention team, because that's a subset of the law enforcement department that they've been trained on how to de-escalate people in heightened anxiety or psychological distress, and they do everything that they can to make sure they get taken to either a psychiatric hospital or get that referral to somebody.
That's really good to know, because I didn't know that there was a specific team that specialized in that. And I think a lot of this is just awareness, right? It's spreading the word about what to do. I think one thing that surprised me, and when I turned to my friend Heather, and she was surprised too, is the question of, are you suicidal? And Heather, do you want to speak a little bit about your reaction to that that question that was posed on the board, and your reaction to actually asking someone that question?
I just thought it was just, I don't know, just jumping straight to the point, that I thought you'd sort of skirt around the issue to find out. I didn't know it would be good to just directly ask, are you suicidal? Have you been suicidal? And then going through those questions of, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? as I think about it now, I think it's probably good because it makes them start thinking and realizing and acknowledging it. But it just seems so shocking to me to jump straight to those questions.
Yeah, I think we're trained to, not trained, but as a society, there's stigma around it. So asking those questions directly, I think stirs up a little bit of fear, right? Yeah. So Debbie, do you have any suggestions on how to deal with the fear of actually asking someone you love and turning to them and saying, "Are you suicidal?" It's a scary question. So any suggestions for that?
Definitely. So the first thing is for yourself to be informed, because it is a common myth that if I talk to someone about how suicidal they may or may not be, you're afraid that you're going to plant the seed in their mind. There is nothing further from the truth. What you've done by asking that question is you normalize the situation and you allow that space for them to talk about it and hopefully de-escalate and you get more hopeful. The other thing, too, is that another myth is that if someone's talking about the fact that they're feeling suicidal, that they are less risk. That's completely a myth. You have to take every single one of those exchanges as serious and address it as such.
I mean, and that was incredibly informative, just to know that the direct approach is a more effective approach. And like you said, it's not going to plant a seed. The seed's there or it's not. And that it was really eye-opening. Another thing that this session did was going through, the stigma around it. And, one thing I think that I've given thought to why mental health, it being an invisible disease, quote unquote, but, if you have diabetes, you go in and you go to a blood test and you see that your sugar levels, it's not like they can put a syringe in our brain and test our dopamine levels, our serotonin levels. And I think that would give people a peace of mind of like, am I just having a bad day, bad week, bad month, or am I having a mental health issue, a mental health illness? So as a person, wanting to be a kinder, more caring, more compassionate person in the world, and a person looking out for my own mental health, any suggestions of someone who's in the fence of, am I just in a funk or is this a thing? What would you suggest them to look at to assess that?
Definitely. So there's a couple of things that you can do. Some people are completely private. So there are actually mental health online screenings that you can do. You would just go to Mental Health America and follow the cues, and you can do an assessment right there in the privacy of your home. It doesn't say if you're depressed or not or anxious, but it does tell you that you share some of the symptoms and some of the signs. Another thing that you can do is ask people around you. Again, that's really probably the least thing that we want to do. Our idea is to hide, so we don't want people to think that we're flawed. But ask people around them, what changes have you seen in me? Secondly, when they are telling you what changes they see in your behavior or how you're thinking, as opposed to getting super defensive, just be able to ask yourself this one question. Are the changes that I feel like I'm going through, how much is it impacting my ability to be the best me? How's it impacting my ability to go to work, school, to jump into my life? And that pretty much gives you the answer that you may or may not be having a problem.
I mean, that's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful question. And I think the work you're doing in this community, in the mental health community, and in the world at large is valuable, needed, and amazing. So thank you so very much, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us at BloodStream. So talking here about mental health first aid is Jessica Bombardier. And when we were in the session with Debbie De La Riva, she brought up a good point. Jessica, do you want to share with BloodStream your thoughts on mental illness and bleeding disorders and their relation?
Sure. So Debbie was talking about how do you define mental illness, and we were broke off into small groups, and we're talking about how we would define that or what it looked like. And as we were going through it, I said, mental illness sounds an awful lot like a bleeding disorder in that it's an invisible disorder for some parts, right? You can't necessarily see it. It's not like a broken arm, and it also another aspect of it was that it's episodic, so it ebbs and flows. Like sometimes you have a bleed, and that's a physical sign or symptom that you have. And just like with a mental illness, sometimes you might be depressed, but then a couple days later you could feel fine. Your bleed may have resolved, and you're not on crutches anymore, but you're still left with that lasting impact of having that injury. Same thing with the mental illness. You may feel better at the moment, but you're left with that impact. Just like those other 2 points, there's no cure for hemophilia. You can treat it with factor, and you can manage the condition. And same with mental illness, you can't cure it, but you feel like you're always in a constant state of just managing it, waiting for it to ebb and flow. Was that all the things?
Yes. And I mean, you may be bleed free for a while, and you may be depression free for a while, but that doesn't mean that you need to step away from the care and your self-care regimen, because it is a lifelong management. So those are amazing comparisons between the two. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. So I'm here with Joseph, and have you been to NHF's annual meeting before?
This is my first time coming to the NHF meeting. Very first time, me and my family.
And what's your reaction to it?
I actually really like it. We are here. My first reaction when I first came in here, I noticed seeing a lot of people with factor 7. And from where I'm from, Augusta, there's not too many people that you see with factor 7 because that's a rare bleeding disorder. And we learned more about factor 8, factor 10, factor 13, factor 14, factor 9. There's so many, and it started not make me feel so bad thinking we're the only people out there, and it was no other help. But when we come to these events, we learn a lot and so much more, and so much to offer to other people.
And so have you followed the rare factor track? Have you gone to some of those sessions?
Yes, ma'am. I went to the rare factor track, which was factor 7, like my son has, and it's more like factor 7 and factor 11 and factor 13, and they was telling us more about how the platelets in their body and the buildup of inhibitors and how they try to stop some inhibitors, but it's kind of hard for some kids to produce certain things in their body to help them. So it's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice event.
And so the best part for you has been kind of gaining a little bit more community, not feeling so alone.
Right. The best part of me is meeting other people and sharing my story and listening to their story, and it's that's the main thing.
And next year's in Anaheim. You plan to go to that one?
Oh, California, yes, ma'am. I plan. Yes, ma'am.
There's Disneyland. You can make a big trip of it. So
yeah, that's the Bay Area, right? So
down by Los Angeles.
Oh, so that's the southern part. That's the nice. The Venice Beach time.
So yeah, I hope to see you next year, and thanks for taking the time to talk to BloodStream, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, I'm here with Matthew Gates, and Matthew, do you want to share your role in the community, and also your experience here this weekend? If this is your first conference, if this is your 100th conference, and then just your general thoughts, sessions you liked, and things that you enjoyed this weekend.
So I've been attending these conferences ever since I was really young, so these are familiar to me. I actually was a recent graduate of the National Hemophilia Foundation's NYLI program, so this is my first time being here as an alumni of that program, and it's just really interesting seeing all the youth that are upcoming in the program and seeing how they're enjoying the conference.
Did you have a favorite session or experience, particularly this year, outside of seeing the community of alums from NYLI?
One thing I did a lot was, my mother actually grabbed me by the hand and introduced me to everybody she knew. So I guess just the sense of community I got here was probably the biggest thing that held a mark with me.
And what is your role in this community?
My current role is that I do a lot of volunteer work with my local chapter, the Hemophilia Foundation of Maryland. So anytime they have events, whether it's a walk or a family game night, I'm always there volunteering.
Awesome. And have you been down the water slide yet?
I have not been down the water slide, but I have been under the waterfall, so that's pretty close.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to going there this afternoon. Thanks for chatting with me. So I'm here outside of the Bombardier blood screening at NHF, and I am with Alan and Kathy Bombardier, Chris's parents. This is their first time here at an annual meeting, and they were here to watch the screening. Kathy, I know you saw it in Colorado a couple weeks ago. What was your experience seeing it today?
It was truly a different experience, I think, being with the community and sharing it with them and letting their kids know that they can do anything that they want to do. It was very moving.
And Alan, for you, was the experience different, or how was it for you today?
Well, I'm glad I'd seen it before, but it was still pretty difficult to go through. It was very well done. Told the story wonderfully. It was kind of neat being in the room with all these people that were directly affected.
Yeah, no, it was a very emotional experience today, and watching everyone come out and just so proud of Chris and the inspiration that he has for this community. And I know being parents, just being proud in general, but there's not that many parents who have a kid who has summited Mount Everest, especially with a chronic condition. So thank you both for being here today, and thank you for chatting with me. So I just ran into Chris Bombardier himself, post Bombardier blood screening. Chris, what was this morning like for you?
It was amazing. It was really great to finally get to share all of those experiences and that journey with the community. And it was a lot more emotional than, well, not more than I expected, but just as much as I expected. But it was really cool to just feel the energy in the room and just finally have it out there and out there with the community. It's great. It's really great.
Was there any point in the film that the community reacted in a way that was surprising or interesting to you?
Maybe not surprising, but I liked when they laughed at Jess and I's corny jokes. That was really awesome, and I think that was my favorite part of the whole thing is getting to share, Jess and I's relationship and how she's supported me through all this. I think that was this most special part, to be able to show that to the community.
And, it ends on this kind of epic, like, what's next moment. Not to blow the film, but do you know what's next?
Well, next adventure, I guess, is we're moving to Boston in 2 weeks. I'm going to start working for Save One Life, which is really exciting. Doing more international work, which is where my real passion lies. So I'm excited for that new chapter and see what we can do in that realm.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I know that you are heading to the exhibition hall and are a very popular man, so thank you for taking a minute to talk to Bloodstream. So I'm out here with community member John McCarthy. He just saw Bombardier Blood. He's also one of our Teen Impact Award recipients from earlier in the weekend. John, what are your reactions to that film?
It was a very emotional film, just to see what he was going through before the events of Mount Everest, before he started to climb it, and during the times. I mean, not being able to see his family and friends every single day, and that's got to be tough on someone. But he had a very powerful team with him at the same time, and that's just amazing to me. Like how his friend that he made in Nepal, clipped him with his carabiner and drug him through to the summit. That's an amazing part of this story. I mean, he wasn't about to let Patrick give up on something that could mean a lot to this hemophilia community. Just drug him right through.
And it's, one of those films, we're not all meant to climb Mount Everest, but we all have, things that we want to achieve. Do you know what your Everest is?
My Everest is to become very successful in a metal band.
Awesome. I mean, that's a big challenge ahead, and I wish you luck. So thanks for taking a few minutes post-screening to talk to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
I sure will. Thank you.
So I just ran into Mason Bobrow. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, first person to get it right for the first time.
Good. So Mason, have you been to NHF annual meeting before?
Yes, I have. I went in, I think it was 2012, I might be mistaken, to Anaheim, California. I also went last year to Chicago when they introduced the Power of 10 track.
Awesome. And so this is the 70th annual. What has been the highlights for you this weekend?
Mostly just meeting the community. It's really nice to have this kind of thing where you can talk openly about your experience, and get other people to understand and relate and to just share your story and hear everyone else's. It's really amazing.
And is there one particular session or experience you've had that was just the highlight so far?
It's not necessarily one session. It's the track. There's a rare bleeding disorders track this year. I am a factor 10 deficient hemophiliac, so I'm a rare bleeding disorder. And they invite us, when we flew in on Wednesday, they invited us to a little dinner with all the factor 10 families and the power of 10. And it's really amazing. I mean, I experienced it last year, but at the same time, I met new people at this one, which means more people were able to come. And it's just truly outstanding when you hear how rare your disorder is to meet a bunch of people that know exactly what you're going through.
I'm sure like people in your community and at your school, like, I don't know if there's anyone who experiences what you experience. So yeah, to be in a community, to say like, oh, me too. Yeah, like I totally
experienced that before. Yeah.
That's a wonderful feeling, right? So that's super cool, and I'm glad that they've developed that. Were there any friends from last year that you met in Chicago that you saw again this year that was exciting to see?
No, sadly, I didn't see anyone I hung out with most of the time last year. Again, this year, I did see a lot of the Factor 10 families again, which was nice. Like I said, in addition to new faces, I met John this year, and we seem to be having a really good time.
Great, awesome. And you just saw Bombardier Blood. What was your favorite part?
The whole thing, can I say that?
Absolutely.
Because it's just awesome, like climbing Mount Everest, man. It's outstanding, and just to think about, it's crazy.
Chris is a pretty awesome guy. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to BloodStream, and I hope to see you again next year.
Of course, I hope to see you too.
So now, post-screening, I'm here with Jessica Bombardier. I don't know why I just said your name like that. I swallowed it really quickly. Bombardier? And Jessica, you received a standing ovation at the end of the film. How did that make you feel?
Crap, I'm going to cry again. It was really special, incredibly unexpected. I felt really uncomfortable, but also just really grateful. I think it meant a lot to spouses and partners of people with bleeding disorders. I've had several people say that to me after and since the movie. So I don't know. It's all very overwhelming.
I mean, yeah, the film highlighted the sacrifices you had to make, actual sacrifices, emotional sacrifices, and your own fears that you had to put aside to support Chris and his dream. Viewing the doc with the community, was that a different experience for you than viewing it a couple weeks ago at home?
I think being able to hear and see all of the reactions from everybody in the room just amplified the emotions I had already had. You hope that everyone's going to receive it well, and you hope that people are going to care. You hope that they're going to be just as attached as we are going through it. And so to have that positive feedback it just really amplified all the emotions I already had.
And, I asked Chris, the film ends at the end of his adventure and him kind of just taking it in. And, him contemplating what's next. What's next for the two of you?
Immediately, we're moving to Boston, so that's kind of a big deal. Chris got a new job, so we're leaving in 2 weeks from Denver, packing up and heading over to Boston. So that'll be our next adventure.
And you also got a new job, which is exciting, and one that you're excited about. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure, yeah. I just signed the offer letter yesterday morning, actually. So I'll be working in research with Alnylam.
That's really, really exciting. Well, thank you for chatting with us after the film. And hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I just ran into Linda Mugford, post the Bombardier Blood screening. Linda, what was that film experience for you?
See, here I'm going to cry again. Knowing the production crew, the director personally, getting the chance to know Chris Bombardier over the past few years, it just touched me so much, and it's so impactful that I was sitting next to Donna D. McKelly, and she whispered to me that there are still people in the United States that don't have adequate care. So it just reinforces the mission and the role that we all have to do, is to get the message out, educate people, and, support Save One Life, and support anyone with a bleeding disorder or chronic disease. Just give people that chance, give them hope, give them goals. Chris is an example of what can be achieved. He was a miracle worker.
Yeah, and the film highlights what can be achieved with proper care, right? And like you said, we see in the film how it's not available around the world, but there are also people in this country too who don't have adequate care or support, and we need to up our game. What was your favorite part of the documentary?
Seeing him and Jess in their home with their 2 puppies. It was just, they're so normal. They're family. It's, they're people. He's not a superstar. Well, he is, but they are normal people.
Normal people with normal fears, normal dogs. It's a very humanizing film to see, Chris's mom and her concerns, and you'd hear all the mothers during the screening being like, but thanks for taking the time to talk to BloodStream. I'm here with Carrie Atkinson, and she just came out of Bombardier Blood. Carrie, what did that movie mean to you?
That was amazing. That was like the highlight of the trip. Chris is just a remarkable person anyway, but it was so heartwarming to have this segment done on his wife, because, the support person, it's amazing as to what we all go through in the community supporting somebody with a bleeding disorder, and I just thought it was so heartwarming to hear her emotions and what she all went through, and his mom, especially being a mom of a child with hemophilia, and so it was just amazing. It was very heartwarming.
And was there anything unexpected or, we all knew what happened. It's not like we didn't know that he summited. So seeing the film, did you learn something interesting about Chris or interesting about Everest or just anything? What was your favorite part?
Well, I think my favorite part was just the raw emotion of, what he all sacrificed to go, them as their family, and that it was so much larger than just him and his family in a way, because he was doing it for everybody. I look at my son 5 years ago was in a wheelchair, and, to think that if he wanted to do this, he probably could. And just to give that hope. I think there was so much hope in that video, and just the connection that he had with all those kids in Nepal was that was probably my favorite part.
Watching the connection, because like you said, it's a blood brotherhood, and no matter where in the world you are, no matter what language you speak, there's that connection. And being a mother of a son with hemophilia, the film giving you hope, that's really beautiful. Was your son here today?
He is not here, no. He's a sophomore in high school, and school is so hard for him, so it's really hard for him to be out of school. But it's really cool.
I'm sure there are going to be plenty of screenings in the next year, and I hope that he can see one. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. All right, so I'm outside the Bombardier screening with Rob Bradford. He was, he was everything. What were your roles in this film, Rob?
Producer, and then when we were in Nepal at base camp and on the way to base camp, I guess I was the shooter, sound guy, media DIT, person who tried to get Chris proficient on a camera. I'm not sure if I really succeeded at that one. But yeah, I was I was the solo person from the film crew there at base camp for 2 months.
So you were up there with Chris the whole time, except for when he went to go summit. You stayed at base camp, but you were by his side the entire time. So this film, I know, means a lot to you. What was your experience viewing it with the community today?
It was incredible. I'm still kind of shaking from it. I've been keeping the movie fresh because this is the screening I was most looking forward to, and man, I'm still buzzing from it. It was really incredible. The energy and the love for Chris and the mission and the film was really palpable. And yeah, I don't know. I'm like lightheaded. I've been crying, I think, for like an hour now. It was really an incredible experience to just get to share that with people.
Well, thank you for chatting with me and sharing your experience viewing it today. Yeah, there wasn't a dry eye in there. You definitely felt the energy, and it was really beautiful to watch it with the community. So thanks for giving us your perspective. So I'm outside the Bombardier screening with Christina De La Riva. And Christina, what did you think of the documentary?
I've heard about it for a while with Patrick, and it's completely different whenever you are talking about something to actually watch it be actualized in front of everyone. The reaction was emotional, and everyone laughed and cried, and it was an experiential journey through his concept that he had, and it's something that the community is going to be able to cherish for a very long time.
And for you, what does this movie mean to you personally, having a family member affected with a bleeding disorder?
So my brother has severe hemophilia A, and to watch someone just go to the highest tops that they can do while having hemophilia really meant a lot to me, to show that we might have a limitation, but we can exceed it through regular care and access to Factor.
And that was clear because there was such a disparity between those who had access and those who did not. So now a personal question for you. What's your Everest?
What's my Everest? My Everest is to get same level of mental health care and just general care for all of the siblings and non-affected members in our community, because I feel like we have a lot of attention that's given to affected members, and which it should be. But the next step is to incorporate all of our community and to really bring care to everyone.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's been a big inclusiveness, I feel like, in this conference. I talked with spouses and partners yesterday. There's a voice, whether you're a sibling of an affected person, whether you're a spouse, that the consensus was that our needs often take back burner. Do you feel that way as well?
I feel like they can take back burner a bit, but I think the main way to break through that is just to have a conscious stream of communication. And I think that through this conference, we have been able to open that door of communication to really address the needs that maybe we haven't seen before, because we aren't able to look at everyone's perspectives equally yet.
Yeah, and that's great. Well, awesome. Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Beth Marshall. I'm the Director of Communications for the National Hemophilia Foundation, and I've been with NHF for, I believe, 11 years. And it's our 70th anniversary. I think it's great when any organization can mark a milestone, and I think 70 years is pretty impressive for a nonprofit. I don't know that they all are sort of able to stay around that long. So there's been tremendous amount of changes in the community since 1948, and NHF has definitely had its ups and downs, but I feel that right now at our 7th anniversary, we're looking at this we've got revolutions in treatment coming out, and there's possible changes to insurance. I mean, it's just such a dynamic time. Some of it's positive. I think some of it is challenging, but I just think, it's a fantastic time to work at NHF because it's so interesting and there's so much going on. The meeting has been great. The meeting is exhausting for NHF staff, but I work personally on the opening session, so that was a lot of fun. We featured a lot of voices from the community. We really wanted to show how much that we really represent all bleeding disorders. We've changed the name of our conference to the Bleeding Disorders Conference because we need to support our people with rare factor disorders and platelet disorders, and make sure that people with VWD feel really included, and our carriers, and just everybody. It's such a dynamic community, and we want to make sure that everybody feels that they have a voice.
And that, just to affirm that, I randomly talked to a couple of people today, and two of them this is part about being at a conference. There's the exhibit hall's closing. But yeah, that's so I randomly interviewed two people, their experience at the conference, and they're both on the rare track, and it was so impactful to have programming that was tailored to their needs. So that's great. And what can those who are here this year and those who didn't make it this year expect for next year? Where is it next year, and what can they look forward to?
Well, next year it's going to be in Anaheim. So it's just same Disney, just different coast. And our planning starts in November of this year. So we'll all be going out to Anaheim. We have community liaisons that work on each track. So we'll have some members of the rare community putting together, making suggestions for the rare track. We'll have some older adult men doing the adult men track. We have people who do our partners and spouses track. So we really get a lot of community input. And so I can't really tell you what we're gonna be doing next year, because we are gonna be waiting for the community to tell us what we should be doing next year. And that's what helps set our agenda.
And that's excellent. And this year, if it was anything like this year, it's going to be fabulous. And I live in Southern California, so one less plane that I have to get on is always exciting for me. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, Beth. And we hope to see you all here next year. So I said he would not be joining me on the podcast, but he can't really stay away.
I just refuse to let an episode go by without being involved.
Yeah, major podcast FOMO. So anyways, Patrick, what was your experience at the 70th annual Bleeding Disorders Conference?
Ooh, big question. I don't know if I can really appropriately capsule it. It's only Monday now. But it was kind of a series of really big things. I feel like everything I was involved with had a lot go into it, and my experience was very specific to my experience. I don't feel like it was particularly reflective of a community experience or
Well, we have the community giving feedback. I'm asking you specifically. So this was the 4th annual Teen Impact Awards, and you also debuted your documentary Bombardier Blood. So
they know all that.
Yeah, so these are two big things. It's okay that they know that. How do you feel?
I feel great. They went great. The Teen Impact Awards was a blast. My buddy Jim Fagan and I had a lot of fun creating this idea that it was actually a late night talk show kind of vibe, the Reasonable Hour nighttime show. We had a lot of fun creating that environment. I think we did a great job making a really fun event to honor 70 teens who have done awesome things. And once again, the teens who were there, some of them had such amazing things to say when they got the mic in their hands, and those bios, man, when we just run down the actual list of accomplishments, it's amazing. And the doc was awesome. I wasn't nervous or really anxious. I think you probably could, second me on that. I was ready. It was time, and I felt like I was ready, and it confirmed what I hoped to be true, that the film's good and it's working, and I'm really excited to be sharing it now, and I can't wait to be sharing it at a chapter near you.
I like that plug at the end. It went really, really well, and they've already heard the feedback from Chris and Jess and his parents, and
I haven't even gotten to hear. I have to listen to the episode to hear that stuff. I didn't even get to hear that stuff. All right, good.
And community members. So yeah, it went really, really, really well. So if I'm a listener and I'm listening to this and I want to see a Bombardier Blood, how do I do that?
Yeah, so bombardierblood.com. on the landing page, there is a link to, I think it's /contact, but if you just go to the homepage, there's a link to where you can request a screening. And people have sent me Facebook messages and emails and all that, and I'm responding and redirecting people. You're welcome to contact me. I will redirect you, because we're getting a lot of requests, and it's amazing, and they should keep coming, but we just got to keep it all organized. So go to the website, follow the links, and make a request, and then just keep up to date with the Facebook page. We have a Bombardier Blood Facebook page, or if you're following me on social media, I'll certainly be talking about it a lot for the next year.
So one question to wrap up. I asked a handful of community members this, and what's your Everest?
Well, my Everest was making the movie. I don't know. I guess it's still trying to, like, I'm not done with the process. You know, my process, it's sort of like there's Everest and the 7 summits. I guess my 7 summits is sort of like the total process of what this film is, and there's still a lot of like work. The work just changes. So I guess it's that. I'm going to stay focused. I think we got something special, and we got to put the work in to really optimize this opportunity to share this film, this story, and our community story with a lot of people. So I just got to keep committed to it and not take for granted that it's good and people like it. I got to keep pushing, keep working. So yeah, that's my Everest. Those are my summits.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for this very short interview.
Yeah. Hey, listen, thank you for doing such a cool, awesome job, like capturing the conference and finding people and collecting various perspectives and voices. Everybody's experience at these things are different, and everyone's point of view coming in, and it's all different. But you know, every time I turned around, you were talking to somebody else and getting another little bit of feedback and insight. So thank you for really making sure that the BloodStream podcast was grabbing some flavors of the conference from the eyes of community members. Thanks for taking the lead on that.
It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun. And did you have a highlight moment from the conference?
Oh, gosh. One of my highlights was surprising Chris at the end of the Teen Impact Awards for his final appearance on stage. If you weren't there, you're going to have to just check out the video when it comes out. But he was invited onto stage for the second time, and he was, relaxed now. It's the second time on stage. We're almost done with the program. But we had one little curveball to throw his way, just before we got on with the final recognitions. And looking at his face as he was staring at me, processing what was happening was quite entertaining. So that's what comes to mind anyway.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This month's episode of the BloodStream podcast is brought to you by Shire. And for that, we say thank you, Shire. This month's Share segment is brought to us by community member Ben Martin. Ben shares his story of having hemophilia and how he sees it as a blessing far more than he sees it as a curse. Let's give it a listen.
I often tell people that having hemophilia has been as much a blessing as a curse in my life. I understand many would not make the same statement, and I understand my circumstances are far from the norm in this community. I was born in the late 70s when the contaminated blood supply was beginning its assault on our community, but was not diagnosed with mild hemophilia until I was 10 years old. I was lucky to avoid that crisis, just as I was lucky to avoid significant long-term effects from the typical bumps and scrapes that kids have, which for me included having stitches 3 different times without getting any treatment for my excessive bleeding. While this frustrated my mother at the time, she now realizes that my younger brother and I were lucky to have our diagnosis delayed until the late 80s. Despite the fact that my symptoms weren't obvious to most, after my diagnosis I felt the psychological weight of being different than other kids my age. I attended hemophilia camp in Northern California for the first time as a 14-year-old, and with the exception of a break during my time at college in Southeast Idaho, have been involved in the community ever since. That experience of being surrounded by other kids like me was truly life-changing. As subcutaneous treatment and gene therapy essentially convert cases of severe hemophilia into mild cases, I find myself concerned that the programs that meant so much to me growing up will lose their value in the eyes of those not directly affected by them. While I do not have physical restrictions and only infuse a handful of times a year, the social and psychological issues associated with having any chronic condition will not go away. The programs put on by this community have had enough of an impact on me that I spend much of my summer ensuring that they continue. I am now a co-director of the summer camp in Northern California and president of the board of an organization called Disabled Adventure Outfitters, or DAO, which involves a week of whitewater rafting for teens with bleeding disorders. My dad still remembers me coming home from camp for the first time, ecstatic that I had met a bunch of others who were just like me. And that is a need that will still exist going forward. As we overcome many of the physical issues associated with bleeding disorders, we can't forget about the psychological effects that come with being different. I fought alongside a team of others to keep DAO alive because we understood the value it has for those who have been taught by the world that they must limit themselves because of a genetic disorder. My involvement in that program over the years was key in giving me the confidence to cross a big item off my bucket list when I went skydiving in Hawaii in September. So, to all of you who will see much improved health as these new treatments reach you, congratulations and welcome to the club. I look forward to sharing the experience with you and remind you all of the importance of passing our traditions and lessons on to the next generation. Though our physical future looks bright, our psychological future must always be tended to.
This month's interview segment is a conversation with spouses of community members sharing intimately the challenges and the joys of being married to someone with a bleeding disorder. All right, so I'd love to pretend that we just came out of the session You, Me, and It, but that was actually several hours ago. We came out of that session and recorded an hour-long four-person discussion, which was really beautiful, talking about the role of being a spouse or partner to a person with a bleeding disorder. And unfortunately, the audio it didn't record, so it was not It was not an interview that was meant to be recorded. But we are here to talk about the same issues because it was clearly something that is under talked about. So I'm here with Susan Hartman, Michael D. Grand Prix. Did I say that correctly? You did. All right, great. And Jessica Bombardier. And the session was great. It was facilitated by Susan. Susan, do you want to tell us a little bit about how this came to fruition, your role in it, the importance of it, and how you felt today went?
Sure. So let's see. So You, Me, and It is actually a workshop rather than sort of a panel where folks just sit around and look at a slideshow. And the idea really is that for those of us, sometimes in a relationship, the bleeding disorder feels like the third wheel or like the other woman at the table with you or in the back of the car or whatever it is. And it's really hard because it's part of the context of your marriage or your partnership, but it's not necessarily something that you really want to be there all the time. And so often when spouses and partners of people with bleeding disorders get together, there's this desire to talk about these things. And so You, Me, and It is a workshop that was designed to be both a panel conversation and a workshop with small groups and other activities where we could really dive into some of the hard conversations that come up around these things. And what it's like to be partnered to somebody who has a bleeding disorder and what it's like to sometimes deal with the hard emotional issues that come with that when it's your partner who has the actual bleeding disorder and the real sort of medical conditions that come along with that. And this is part of a spouse partner track, which is something that this is the fourth year for this track at the Bleeding Disorders Conference. And it was really meant to provide a space for spouses and partners who don't always have an opportunity to be themselves as spouses and partners here at these events, to be able to dive deep into the conversations that affect us as the people who partner with people who have bleeding disorders.
That was a great description of this morning. Can you share with our audience who you are, your relationship to the bleeding disorder, who your husband is, his diagnosis, whatever you feel comfortable sharing?
So let's see. I've been in the community for 18 years. I am the spouse to my husband, Dan. He has severe hemophilia A. He also has HIV and hepatitis C, which he recently cleared, which is fantastic. His HIV is undetectable, and so we're living this like kind of normal life for the first time in quite a while, and it's really great and it's awesome.
Great. And Michael, do you want to say a little bit about who you are, your relationship to the community, and what your biggest takeaway from this morning was?
Yeah, so my name is Michael de Grand Prix, and my husband, Rich Pizzillo, who's the executive director of the New England Hemophilia Association, he has hemophilia A, and I met him about 8 years ago, and before that there was no hemophilia von Willebrand's bleeding disorder vocabulary in my lexicon. So this is, I'm adapted to it at this point, but it was all new, and it's been quite the learning experience. I feel like I have a master's degree at this point, still working on my doctorate, but I've been privileged to be married to Rich now for about 3 years, and it is I've learned a lot, and for Rich and I, hemophilia has been a third member of the party, and that's been cool, but we also don't let that be the dictating factor that tells us who we are, what we're going to do, where we're going to go. We just were on vacation in Ireland, and I have a great picture of Rich infusing in a car park at a Tesco. And he was like, I feel my knees coming on. And I said, all right, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, oh, let me get in the trunk real quick, and then we can take off. And so just in the car, he infused. And I got to say, that's definitely not the first time that I've seen that happen. In fact, the front seat of the car might as well be an infusion suite at this point with a little Sharps container. But one of the things that I took away from this morning session with you, me, and it is that, there's a lot of frustration out there, and it can be really challenging for people. We all have very different experiences, but everyone's experiences are to be respected, and sometimes it can be really, really challenging with bleeding disorders. But at least from my perspective, it is about perspective. You've got to just make a decision, a conscious decision about how and what you're going to let this bleeding disorder do as a member of your relationship. And if you want it to, if it rears its head, you're going to have to kind of deal with it one way or another. So for us, we've made it that we're going to deal with it in a good way with a smile on our face, and we're going to make it through and be optimistic, because that's really the best way for us to make it through a situation like that.
Yeah, and your positivity definitely shone through in the conversations earlier. It was great to have there were both the affected with the bleeding disorder and the partners, spouses, and friends of those people in the room. And at one point, we were split up into two groups. So it was a really wonderful opportunity to be with a group of men and women who are the other in the equation, the support person, the person without the bleeding disorder, and what kind of feelings arise, what are hard about those feelings. And earlier today when I introduced Jessica on the podcast and brought her on as a guest co-host today with me, I introduced her as Mrs. Jessica Bombardier, wife of Chris Bombardier. And one of the things that came up this morning was identity, and being the partner of someone with a bleeding disorder, and that being shaping your identity and influencing your identity, and also like how do you protect your identity. So Jessica spoke a little bit on that. Can you tell us a little bit what you shared with the group?
Sure. So I think the most interesting part of being introduced to this community has been that I've kind of always been Chris's wife. Or I think I told the joke earlier that someone came up to me and they're like, oh, Mrs. Chris, you must be Mrs. Chris. And I'm like, I'm wearing a name tag, sir. Like, no, my name is Jessica. But yeah, lovely to meet you as well. And I think it's been, as a really loud personality or independent person, it's been interesting trying to find my own footing within this community as an individual who connects with the community. I want to be a part of the community, but also trying to figure out how to do that in my own space, aside from Chris and all of his accomplishments and his name.
And Michael, you had mentioned with the group that you're a gregarious, outgoing person who likes to be deeply involved in things. So when you were brought into the community, as opposed to feeling like an outsider, you embraced it in a different way. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that's helped shape who you are right now?
Absolutely. And you, me, and it plays into this as well. I find that my perspective on all of this, being in a relationship with somebody who has a bleeding disorder, being in a relationship with Rich, who is somebody who's been around for a while. He's done a lot of work in the community in the past 15 years or so. And it is very much kind of a choose your own adventure situation. The book series from the 1980s that I remember very fondly. Now I couldn't read until the early 90s just for age verification there. But I will say that it's very much up to you how you want to take this, what path you want to take. You can get as involved as you want. You can make a name for yourself as much as you want. One of the things I liked about going to a small college, and I promise I'll bring this back, but I really liked going to a small school growing up. I went to an undergrad of about 1,900 students, and I liked it because you could either be as well known as you wanted to be, or you could be as anonymous as you wanted to be. And it's really kind of similar in the bleeding disorder sphere here. I can get as involved as I want. I happen to work for the Hemophilia Federation of America as their creative director, and that's been a blessing. Everything about my personal journey in the bleeding disorders community has been, in my opinion, a blessing. Rich and I have a much stronger relationship because of it. And since we've got the third wheel of big old Hemo over there, it's been Hemo's been a great third member of it as well. And that's the outlook that we've taken on this. And again, I can't say it enough, perspective is really important here, at least for me, and the way that I look at this, and the way that Rich and I look at this, and the way that we cope individually and together as a unit as we look forward to the different challenges that bleeding disorders can bring every day, whether it be, Rich's daily infusions, or coming up, he's about to have a procedure that will render one of his arms, his right arm, he will not be able to use it. And so I actually am going to have to learn how to infuse him. I've done it before, but I will have to really get my skills up to par to be able to infuse him properly in the crook of his elbow there, or of his arm. And that's going to be a challenge, but I also am like, you know what? I really don't have any choice here. My husband, the love of my life, needs me, and I'm going to go for it. I have to, for his betterment. I mean, we could have a nurse come in, but, then we have to have another person, a fourth person, you, me, it, and the nurse, all come in together and to be able to deal with this hemophilia. And I don't want to add another person to the equation. I want to be there for him. I want to take on this role. I want to be able to support him in that way. So I keep going back to it, but it's perspective.
And, we are all in these relationships with our partners and our spouses, and most of us have came in here on our full volition, like knowing that there was a chronic condition. But an interesting thing today was a person in the group did not know he married someone without a diagnosis. Susan, do you want to speak a little bit to that, and just your opinion on this being a choice, and what does that mean to actively choose to participate with a relationship where there's an added challenge versus finding this out later on?
Sure. So one of the things that I've experienced in my time, and one of the reasons why I think having a spouse partner track and having these conversations, whether it's here at the annual at the Bleeding Disorders Conference, or if it's in our chapters, and why there's a space for the spouses and partners, is because I think we do make choices to be in these relationships. In my case, I knew my husband's medical condition from when we were in high school, and when we got together later as adults, it was like, I knew what I was getting into. I think I knew intellectually what I was getting into. I've learned a lot more since then. And I think that's it's a powerful choice to make. I've known folks over the years, or in this case, wives over the years, who've chosen not to stay in their relationships. And hemophilia might not have been the only catalyst for their leaving, but ultimately it was definitely part of the mix. And I'm sure it played some role in their decision or whatever the stressors were that ultimately had them choose to leave their relationships. And so I think that having an opportunity to really share that and be a part of that conversation around why are we here? How do we stay in it? And how do we find a role for ourselves and a voice for ourselves as members of the community, but also in our relationships has been really important. And I think to Michael's comment earlier, I think there's power in making choices. The choose your own adventure, the power is in the choice. It's not, the adventure is going to happen to you regardless, but when you get to choose what direction you take, you put yourself in a new place, in a new way of handling whatever it is that adventure includes, the good and the bad, for better, all of it, positive and negative. But I think that one of the things that I heard today, and it was the first time I'd ever heard it, and this is why I think this is such a powerful opportunity to have these conversations, is that, in my case, I have a husband who has a severe hemophilia, and I kind of feel like I'm pretty seasoned in that role. But there's a gentleman in here today who didn't make the choice to be involved with his wife, who has a bleeding disorder. Ultimately, she had a number of medical conditions that went undiagnosed for a long time, and it was after 10 years that they realized that after near-death experiences and problems with childbirth and other things, that she had von Willebrand's disease. And he had a lot of anger around that, because he didn't choose to be married to her with her bleeding disorder. He chose to be married to her, and then the bleeding disorder kind of happened. And I think that's really powerful, because I think it's that role of choice. And when that choice is taken away from you, where does that leave you? What does that leave you with? Does it leave you with anger? Does it leave you with resentment? And how do you find your way through that? And I don't necessarily have all the answers for him, but I think the answers is in the room and is in part of having these conversations and trying to find that voice and opportunities to support one another. And I just think that that's really important. And I really felt it was a valuable conversation today. Even though there were men and there were women and there was rare bleeding disorders and von Willebrand's disease and hemophilia, and they're different stories, but I think there's power in diversity, because I know I learned today. And I think that the more we have these conversations and the more we open up the net to make sure that we are capturing as many of these conversations as we can, that often happen in corners or in rooms or in the car on the way home from an event, if we can find a way to unearth them and have people really talk about them, then we can really find ways to give people more choice and more opportunity to find their roles in the community. And to ultimately, it's about living happy, healthy, awesome lives and being empowered in the relationships that we're in. And for many, for some of us are parents, and that role starts to change over time. But it's just the powers and the choice. And if you take that away, then it's how do you provide the supports for that? And I don't have all the answers, but I just feel like there's power in having the conversations and posing the questions that we need to know exist.
Susan, your comment made me remember one of my favorite parts of the breakout sessions that we had. We started talking about topics that are difficult for us to bring up with our partners, things that we feel like we have a hard time communicating, or emotions that we feel like we have a hard time communicating. And there was this really fascinating consensus of sort of anger and guilt in this cyclical pattern where it kind of goes back and forth. And coming from my own relationship, I felt myself like nodding obnoxiously to what everybody was saying, because I feel like we've all been there. And there's this it starts with a choice. This person has a bleeding disorder and you've chosen that. You've chosen a life with this person. But that doesn't mean that you don't still feel some frustration and some anger around when they get a bleed and it's an inconvenient time, or maybe they have such a bad bleed that they're bedridden for a certain amount of time. And then what comes after that anger is guilt, that you feel angry because you've made this choice, because you want to be empathetic and you want to take care of this person, but you're still angry, but then you're guilty, and then you're angry, and then you're guilty. And there's this like awful cycle. And even now everyone is nodding their heads. And Susan is saying that you just like shove it down inside because you can't talk to someone who has a condition they're born with, that you're angry of the symptoms of their condition that you've chosen to marry. So that was just a really beautiful conversation that we all had, and was so honest that I think we feel regularly.
I think it was definitely a common theme that came out. And what was cool, Susan, you mentioned the diversity of the group. And there were men, there were women, there were all kinds of bleeding disorders, there were all kinds of ages. But everyone who spoke, I felt like, oh, they know me. I feel seen, I feel heard. Like, it was really, really beautiful. And I don't actually think I've been with, outside of Jessica, really, like a group of people who I'm like, oh, they get like how I feel. And like, because there's that guilt layer, you almost feel bad having those feelings, but to like be able to share those feelings with people who feel it in a non-guilty way. I think this session could have gone on for 8 hours. I think everyone was so ready to share. And that, you know, there's the it sometimes gets the most attention in the relationship, and that the it is not just the bleeding disorder. Like you said, Susan, there's HIV, Hep C, that's prevalent in the community. And then, you know, there's also anxiety, depression, and many other comorbidities that come along with bleeding disorders. So there's this long list of it, and they all play a role in the priorities of what happens in the relationship, what happens in the life. And as a support, there is a layer of frustration that comes where it's like, well, when do my needs matter? When do my priorities matter? When do my dreams matter? Michael, you want to chime in?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was that I really enjoyed, and this kind of goes off what you were saying, Jessica, and you as well, is that there was a really strong agreement between everyone that things like therapy or having a confidant or a friend that you can speak to who's outside of the relationship can be a really healthy thing. That's a great opportunity that you don't have to, just somebody who's unbiased, who can just listen to you. And you know, with mental health being a really hot topic right now, it was really nice to see everyone nod their head that they agreed that having good mental health practices was something that was really important in a situation like this. And that was really a nice thing to see everyone come to agreement on. So I was really pleased by that. And there was also a young woman, I wanted to also add, there was this young woman who was there. Her friend has a really rare factor deficiency, and she was one of the most insightful people, and she was just there because her best friend has a deficiency in her factor, and she just wanted to be there to support, and they've been friends for years, and she wasn't that old, to be honest, and but she just had some of the most insightful stuff to say, and in particular, she kind of got us jogging and talking about what an important role communication has in this whole thing. And that goes to, you know, speaking to a friend or a confidant or a mental health professional, a therapist, but communication being such an important part of what you're supposed to do with all these feelings, whether they're built up or whether they're conversations you're having with your spouse or partner or friend, but how key and critical communication is between people who are involved in a relationship, since it really can't do a lot of verbal talking. It certainly does physical talking, sometimes with pain and other things, but communicating between everyone about those, like what's happening, is really important, and it should never be something that's knocked down a notch because you don't feel like it or you're scared or something like that. You owe it to yourself, to your spouse, and I guess to the bleeding disorder, to make sure that you're having those conversations.
Well, and to that point too, I feel like what came up about communication was because the it is involved. Communication in all marriages is paramount, right? And the it creates barriers to communication sometimes because as the spouse or partner, if you're feeling a frustration, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling ignored, and your partner has an active bleed or your partner's in a depressive episode due to anything or relation to the bleeding disorder, you almost lose that feeling that your sadness, your anger, your frustration is valid. And so it was nice to be with a group of people who we were like, no, our feelings are valid. And they kind of to discuss strategy too, of like, you know, it is hard to say like when your person's laying up on the couch or they're not feeling good or they're just in a pissy mood, which I think was a term that was used this morning, that to bring up like, hey, you disappointed me in this way. Like, you're not trying to like kick them while they're down. And then also too, then when things are good, it's like, well, I'm not trying to ruin the sunny day.
Well, one of the things that I think I had mentioned during the session was the best time to fix the roof is when the sun's out, not while it's raining and it's leaking and you're like, damn it. And so even though it can be a little bit of a mood killer, but it's important, you know, Rich and I, we take advantage of moments when we're in the car together on car trips. And not that we sit there and we're like, we're going to talk about our bleeding disorder now. But it's important to find the natural moments where it fits. And then usually the nice thing too is if we're having a good discussion when the sun's out, as you just said, it's also a great time to have a little fun with it and have humor and be like, oh man, if you get another one of those bleeds, I am definitely going to get you like 6 gallons of chicken soup and just be like, you're on the couch, girl. So it's a good opportunity to have those kinds of discussions.
And what is it about road trips? I feel like there is this thing about road trips when you're in the car, it feels like Switzerland. Like it's this very neutral territory to have these very open talks. Yeah, there's no technology, there's no distraction, and you have each other's full undivided attention. And I like how, I don't even know if you noticed you said this, but you said, talk about our bleeding disorder, which is interesting language to use because it really does feel that way sometimes. Like, I think as a partner, you take on ownership, and whether that's right or wrong or indifferent, that ownership affects your identity. It affects your relationship too. And then, you know, we did some cool exercises this morning. I agree with this statement. I disagree. And, you know, we were split in some scenarios about caregiving, you know, because we're all different people, of course, so how we relate to it. But that can change your ability to live your own life if you become someone's caregiver. And in a partnership, we should both be caregiving. So a gentleman brought up a really interesting question, and between the four of us, we were a little bit divided. And his question was, have you faced a medical situation where you became the patient and your affected person with a bleeding disorder became the caregiver? And were they able to be an effective caregiver, or what was your experience? So between the four of us, I'm going to have us talk a little bit about that. I'll start with Susan. Tell us about your situation.
So we joke all the time that my husband's like a professional patient, because with various bleeding disorders and other things, he's really good at being a patient. He's really good at navigating hospitals. He's a self-advocacy ninja, and he's done amazing things advocating for himself with medical insurance. And one of the things that would come up is like, we're always talking about his bleeding disorder, or like, oh, well, someday if you get hurt, or someday if you're on disability, or someday if this happens or if that happens. And we never really talked about, well, what if something happened to me? Because I had always been really healthy, and I had never had surgery, and I never had anything happen. So one of the things that was interesting is that I had surgery. I had major surgery. Shocking, right? Like, I actually had a thing, and I had to go to the doctor, and I actually had to have surgery. And unexpectedly, I was out of work for 4 weeks. I had a long rehab, and I had never been in kind of in that sort of recovery situation for a long time. And but we had been through a thing before where he had his knee replaced, and the surgery didn't go right. And it's like a big, long story. But it was 9 months of 4 surgeries. And I of course, you're in crisis. You're going to take care of your partner. You love them, and they need help, and you're doing it. And I thought I did a pretty good job. I mean, it was great, right? Like he's better, and we're good, and we're still married. It's cool. But anyway, so I got sick, and he went online. I think before I went to the hospital to have my surgery, and he went on Amazon and he ordered one of those tables with legs so that you can eat dinner while you're in bed and you get to like have a tabletop. I mean, this is not rocket science, but he's like, well, I ordered this because I knew you would need it. And it was just such a kind gesture from somebody who's been in that position. And I never did that. I was like, man, I need to up my game because I thought I was really awesome because we got through all of this. But then I was like, oh, I never ordered the table. He was like balancing things on pillows and, so anyway, for us, it was a really great moment in our relationship where for once he was able to share his experiences with me and he was able to do for me what has been done for him over his time and what I was doing for him when he was going through his knee surgeries. And it was a really great moment for me to be in that other role. I think it's been really good for our marriage overall because I think it allowed that role reversal that we needed, and he really excelled at it. It was great. In fact, like I said, he showed me up. Like he did a better job than I did. And so I think it was been really good. And I would say, looking back over our now 18 years of being together, I would say it's one of those moments that I can say this was a watershed moment. This was a benchmark in our relationship where I think this went great, and this was a turning point in a good way because I think it was a bit of that role reversal and some of those conversations of like, oh, well, you might get sick someday, or you might be on disability someday, or I don't know that we have those in the same way that we used to. So I think you learn in real time, right? How to get better at this stuff.
And it was cool to see that as a true equalizer in the relationship, and that his experience as a patient informed him to be like an A1 caregiver. And that's not always the case. So when we had this conversation, I feel like the group was split. People were saying like, oh my gosh, no, my person's so used to being a patient and didn't know how to be a caregiver. Michael, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, and first of all, I recently had a couple of teeth extracted from my mouth, and that was a rather unpleasant experience, mostly because I couldn't eat for about a week and a half. And I did lose about 7 pounds, which is nice, but beach bod in the fall. But anyway, I digress. Rich was absolutely fabulous, and he was very sweet and kind and got me lots of Ensure and made sure that I had the things. But it was, only one other time aside from this, I had a kidney stone, and it was quite the flip for Rich and I. And I'm just so used to being the caregiver. I love that role. That's kind of, the role I feel like I was born to play. But and Rich, who did, like I said, a fabulous job, but it was definitely like a little bit of a fish out of water because that's just not the normal place that he sits in for these kinds of situations. But, he was there for me whenever I needed something, but it was probably not the most comfortable place for him. And I feel like that's pretty common for folks in the bleeding disorder community who have been the patient for so many years. I'm thinking of a young man out in the Colorado area who I was talking to his mother, and now that he isn't, he's on a new medication, he's not bleeding anymore, and he doesn't know what to do with a regular life or the role reversal, I guess is what the point I'm getting to. And so that can kind of shake things up. But kind of as Susan was saying, and I agree in a different but similar way, I find that every single thing that happens with this bleeding disorder, even if it is totally sucky in the moment, it always makes us stronger and better in our relationship because it forces communication. And in the end, we always come out triumphant because we've had those moments that we share together. Again, it's our moments, our struggles. Even though I don't have the bleeding disorder, it comes together for the two of us and really helps us to just have another great moment and memory that we can share. And most likely we'll probably laugh about it later. And I'll always joke, and I told Rich I was going to order him a Candy Striper uniform on Amazon to make him wear while I was having my teeth out. And the other thing that's also pretty funny with teeth out is there's some good videos of me coming out of my coming out of my anesthesia, which have made their way around to a few people, and those are pretty funny as well. Those will be available for a small price later on, but we'll give you the 800 number later.
Well, and that brings it back to your continued attitude of this is truly a choose your own adventure. And ultimately, the partnership is a choose your own adventure, and however you can see it. And again, with the Candy Striper uniform, adding in humor always helps a situation when it otherwise feels frustrating or sad or rough. And Jessica, you had a good experience when you were the patient. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will be just reiterating what Susan already said, but I think there's a couple components of Chris's personality that really contributed to our experience when we had this role reversal. Chris hates attention. I think everyone who's met him knows that, which is really ironic that he's in the position that he's in. But he just doesn't like being doted on. He doesn't like being the center of attention. And so he does not make a good patient. For him, whenever he has a bleed or an injury, everything's fine. He's fine. Everything's fine. The other component of his personality that is contributed to our experience was he is just a deeply empathetic person, and he's very sensitive. So anytime that I'm injured or have a situation of that role reversal, he's all over it. He's doing anything that he can to try to make me feel better, to the point of just really annoyance. Like, could you just leave me alone for a second? But it's beautiful. It's lovely. There is also that moment of okay, now we're getting the walk a mile in someone else's shoes, right? And I can see the things that are enjoyable about this and the things that are not so much. Like, I should have bought that damn table on Amazon, or maybe I'll leave him alone for 5 minutes and stop asking him how he's doing, because that's obnoxious. But there's that moment where you, what was the phrase of walking a mile in someone else's shoes? You really get that opportunity to see, here's what this person is going through. I kind of get it. I mean, you don't all get it all the way, but you get it a little bit more. So yeah, we had a lovely experience. Side story, and whoever edits this can cut it out, won't hurt my feelings, but we were doing some renovations on the outside of our house, and we had a very scary moment where I fell off a ladder. It caved underneath me and started collapsing into the fence. And in the moment, I remember thinking, okay, I can go with the ladder and fall into the wooden fence and maybe puncture my face, or I could fall the opposite direction and fall into the house and maybe gracefully slide down the side of the house. I chose option B. And save that face. At the same time, Chris, who's also watching this happen in slow motion, is thinking okay, which way is she going to go, and what am I going to do, and how am I going to respond? And the bleeder chose to throw himself underneath my falling body to save me as I'm careening to the earth. And I remember we were both fine. There weren't any serious injuries. I had a couple bruises on my leg, but I remember once it's all said and done and we're sitting there and our dog is in our business, licking our faces, crying, trying to figure out if we're okay. I look at him and I'm like, what were you thinking? Why did you I mean, you're sweet, but why did you do that? But that's just his personality and kind of the way that he approaches it. It's a funny story. I don't know why I decided to tell that story, but it was just popped into my mind.
We love narratives here at the BloodStream Podcast, so thank you for sharing. It is interesting, and I felt like the group this morning, it leaned a little bit more on the side of the affected person not being used to that role of caregiving and not really knowing what to do and kind of being a fish out of the water. And to speak a little bit on my experience this year, I had 3 surgeries, and I've never had a surgery in my life. I'm the healthy one. I just haven't faced health conflict. So I've had 3 surgeries, and we knew they were coming up. And, at one point, Patrick asked if I could, he might be busy with work stuff. Someone else might need to pick me up. And I was thinking I don't think he wasn't thinking that I would need him or that might be insensitive, but just more so a reflection of you got this, girl, attitude. I'm coming out of anesthesia, a several hour surgery. And, you know, and he was busy with work. All works out. He's able to pick me up from the surgeries. And I think after the first surgery, realized like, oh, this is something like, you know, I got to come out. She's coming out in a wheelchair. Like, you know, we just can't order an Uber for this. And I'm not like, he is a good caretaker. And then, you know, we get home and runs to CVS and gets the things I need and makes sure I have food, but then like goes to do his work. And, you know, when I'm the caregiver, I'm like probably annoying and I'm probably constantly checking in. And like that just wasn't really his style. And now reflecting, I realize why that wasn't his style, because on a 6-week recovery, day 1, I'm up and, you know, mopping the floor, making a unnecessary dental appointment for the next day. Like I was uncomfortable in the patient role. And so I made it seem like I was okay. And I never said like, I need you. Like that was too vulnerable for me because I'm not used to being in this role. But like, I needed him. And then of course I got mad because I was like, why am I not being doted on? Why, like, I feel like I'm always the caretaker. But then I like now look back and I'm just like, oh, I didn't let myself be the patient in any of the scenarios really. And, you know, interestingly enough, we've like never really talked about this. So, you know, him hearing this on the podcast for the first time, I'm sure he'll be like, whoa, okay, well, blowing up our spot on the podcast. But it's all about vulnerability, right, Patrick? Anyways, I digress. But another theme that came up that was interesting was money and insurance. And again, those are things that come up in regular marriage, but are way heavier, way weightier when there is an it in the equation. It affects where you can live, the jobs you can have. Susan, do you want to speak a little bit to your experience with that?
Well, you know, one of the things that often comes up, and myself included, is that going back to when I said, I made a choice to be in this relationship, you know, and I had all these, you know, I understand hemophilia and I understand his HIV and I learned a whole lot about Hep C. And I was like, oh, I can understand all of this stuff. But I didn't realize that there would be stressors that are not actually about the bleeding disorder. They're more about the context that the bleeding disorder creates. And so one of the stressors that came up for us was actually that our career decisions, including my career decisions, are dictated by health insurance. And I think they probably are for a lot of people. With other health conditions, medical insurance is expensive in this country. It's hard to get. It's employer based. But I was in a position where decisions I wanted to make about career decisions that I wanted to make had to be made based on the availability of medical insurance to cover him, and that was something that's the kind of stressor, and that includes that's the kind of thing that comes up all the time that I don't think at least myself, I don't think that I didn't anticipate that. That's not something that I anticipated. I anticipated bleeding episodes and dealing with infusing all the time, but I didn't realize that there can be some stress around what are the choices that we're able to make in the context of living with a bleeding disorder. And that can be geographies, what cities you can live in, what HTCs are available to you. Do you want to live near an HTC at all? Like, that's a huge issue. Where can you live in the country? Can you live outside the country? Are there other countries that will let you move there? Hemophilia is very expensive for national healthcare systems. So there are some places that just, hemophilia is on a short list of problems you can't bring to that country because you're too expensive. And so I think that's something that, while it's not cause for ending the marriage and moving on, you know, but these are things that cause a lot of stress. And it impacted decisions that I was making about my job and my work. And I'm not the one with the bleeding disorder, you know, and I think that's hard. And I think that's something that we don't always get to talk about. And it's not something that's always mentioned. It's like the unspoken things, that the choices that we make in time and the decisions that we make in real time. And they can have real implications on health and happiness and your ability to feel satisfied with the work that you're doing. But you don't always get to have that freedom because it all comes down to the medical insurance or the costs that brings to the family.
Yeah, and making that choice and how it impacts, like you said, your career decisions and your personal satisfaction with your work as the other. I mean, I had mentioned earlier too, I have a job that full-time offers full-time. When I work full-time, I get full-time benefits. Before Patrick was married to me, he had his own private benefits. Those are very expensive. And so when we got married, he came onto my health benefits. But I have to work full-time. And then a year ago, I found my true calling as a doula, which is also a sole proprietorship, self-employed. So if I were to go down part-time in order to be the doula I would like to be, I would lose my health benefits, and then we would have 2 self-employed people who would have to get outside benefits, and those numbers would be astronomical. So, part of me feels like I'm a little bit trapped in keeping this full-time position, which I love, and which, even if I was doing the doula stuff to full capacity, would even want to keep my job part-time. So it's not like I'm disappointed or unsatisfied in my work with that, but it's like I really want to pare down those hours so that I can do my life's work, but I can't pare down those hours because we need the health insurance. So, that's just an interesting perspective, and one that was shared a lot. But another perspective that was shared by many people was how the affected person had to stay in jobs. And Jessica, do you want to share a little bit about that in your relationship?
Yeah, I think that's actually really common among individuals with the bleeding disorders, or parents of individuals with bleeding disorders as well, who feel stuck in a position that they maybe don't quite enjoy. Very early on in our relationship between Chris and I, he was working in a position that he didn't care for. It's not where his passion was. And it had a huge effect on our relationship. We were arguing a lot, and he would just felt miserable, and that translates, right? So there came a point in our relationship when I told him, either you need to leave this job, or I don't know if our relationship will survive. To leave that job meant he was leaving his insurance. And so we had a very serious conversation about how do we get him insurance, and I was working at a place that provided benefits as well. And so at this very early stage of our relationship, where we're by no means settled on a decision that we were going to get married, we weren't even close to like an official engagement, like that had been briefly mentioned, but not seriously discussed. We were now talking about potentially getting paperwork drawn up for like a civil union so that he could join my insurance, so we could keep dating. We thought we might need to get married so we could keep dating. And it's a serious problem, and I think it's one that many people face, and one that was reiterated a lot in the session today.
Do you want to speak to your experience with that?
Yeah. So when like I said, we got married about 3 years ago, coming up, and we did contemplate getting married kind of on the DL, so that we could enjoy the benefits of being combined on insurance. And it was a very serious thing that we thought about. We were like, if we have to do it, that's what we're going to do. We have no qualms about it. At that point, we were engaged. We knew this was going to be a long road trip. But we were totally serious about it. And it ended up being that that would not have been fruitful for us. We both happened to get our insurance right now through the exchange. But as both of us continue to look to the future with employment, shorter and longer term, it is absolutely one of the top things that we are considering is what kind of benefits are we going to be able to get, in particular with health insurance, and how can we benefit, or he benefit from each other's health insurance situation, whatever that might be, because it gets really expensive. It's a tough conversation, certainly not a fun one, but highly necessary in order for us to be able to sustain not going bankrupt or anything like that because of the amount of money that we're talking about in these situations. So
yeah, that was definitely something that resonated with everyone who was there, and it affects both partners' life choices, career choices, and personal satisfaction. And then of course, personal satisfaction then affects the marriage. So this is all coming back to like how these things affect, everyone here is saying like, I want to have a happy, satisfied marriage. Like no one doesn't want that. So, and it's challenging with or without a bleeding disorder. but a bleeding disorder adds an added layer. Another thing that came up that I think is like, we didn't really deep dive it as a group because I think it's like a topic that makes people super emotional. But, you know, life expectancy and longevity. Now, you know, the average person with hemophilia now has very similar life expectancy to that of healthy peers. But there's still health complications, and then there's still accidents that happen, and then it's making decisions. And I feel like there was a different perspective from some of the people in the community who had, you know, comorbidities from the contamination crisis, where there's this like heightened feeling of who knows how much time we have left. And even though the drugs have gotten better and, you know, if you've survived to this point, like, you know, but there's that trauma and that fear. And then regardless, like, this is a community of loss. This is a community where everyone has been affected by a loss of someone with a bleeding disorder. So that's just, it's just always in the back of my mind. And it was really, really, I don't know, it really was relieving to hear that there are people who love people just as much as I love Patrick, loving their partners and their spouses, who live with that like trepidation always like running under, like it's just an undercurrent. Does anyone want to speak to their feelings on that and how that affects their partnership or marriage?
Yeah, I will. When you brought this up initially, the first thing that came to mind was in terms of life expectancy. I remember after Rich and I had been engaged, I was in the car with my dad, car trips, hashtag car talks. And my dad said to me, and he really meant it from a very genuine, like caring place, but it was also just, he didn't know. And he asked me, you know, are you okay with the fact that Rich probably isn't going to live as long as you because of his hemophilia? And I was like, well, and I had to process quite a bit in that moment. And I realized that the only thing my dad knew, or not the only thing, but my dad knows hemophilia because he remembers what it was like a long time ago. He doesn't understand the landscape that we're in now. And so I took it as an opportunity to educate him on the fact that, to be honest, Rich, who has more athletic than me, will probably outlive me by a couple decades. So he's set to go. But I was like, wow, geez, you know, it had never otherwise crossed my mind. And to be honest, and so I was like, oh my gosh, well, yeah, I think we'll be okay. And then a couple of years later, more recently, Rich and I got life insurance. And we were actually very surprised that Rich was able to get life insurance. And he got a decent policy that and it's whole life insurance as well. So it's an investment in him. While he's living, we could potentially benefit from it. And if he were to pass away unexpectedly, I would benefit from it. And I also got a plan so that he's taken care of. Because I don't have a bleeding disorder, I was able to get a higher one at a almost similar rate. And so he'll be well taken care of. But those discussions are not the most fun, but making sure that he's taken care of is really critical, and vice versa. But it's a game. We're in a different time, I think, now too than we were, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, etc. So at this point, I think he'll live a very healthy, productive life. Might be a little harder on the joints, but it depends on the activity level of the person that you're talking about too. So for him, I'm blessed that he's a pretty athletic kind of guy. So I think we'll get a long one out of that. But yeah, it's an interesting, strange conversation to have. But again, a necessary one, and it's good for a car talk. So yeah. Or if you're just in an insurance office and looking for something to do. So,
I think the thing is that when my husband and I got together, it was 2000, and we spent a lot of time talking about, well, would he have to go on disability? Would he be able to work full time? And how long would that happen? He wasn't sick and he wasn't unwell, but it was just this notion that the time frame might be a little shorter for him. And with improved medications and with his ability to clear Hep C, which is fantastic, all these things moving forward, like we don't have those conversations anymore. Now that I feel like we're just normal. And it's more like, what are the long-term impacts and how are his joints going to do? And most people get a new knee and then they're like 75 years old, so they never need to get another new knee, whereas we anticipate he's going to outlive his knee, so he will need a replacement knee for his replacement knee. And we're like, wow, maybe you'll get better parts. Maybe the parts will be better then. Like, you'll be able to upgrade. Yeah, right? Like, you'll be like Robo Guy. But so we talk about that, and it's become this whole thing where it's a shift of perspective that I think is really, really welcome. I think it's really great for us. But I think I think it's good that we spent the time we spent having the hard conversations earlier on when we thought that things might be a little different. His doctor turned to him one time. Well, I probably shouldn't share this, but anyway, his doctor turned to him one time and he was a pretty funny guy. And he goes, yeah, you're like the healthiest, really sick guy I've ever met. And so I was like, this is really important because this is so awesome. And nobody ever thought that you would have that. Your diagnosis would be that you're like really healthy and sick at the same time. And so I think that that's just a game changer for us. And we haven't, we don't dwell on it, but we have really realistic conversations about what that might mean. But it's not so much about like, oh, well, honey, when you're not able to work someday, or when you have to go on disability someday, or when your joints stop working someday. Now it's more like a regular conversation about, well, when we get older, we're both going to have to contend with this. And what if neither of us can work full time? And I think it's been an equalizer over time.
It's a little bit of an unfair question. I think our personal conversations about death and morbidity are a little bit different than others, in that we've talked about it as a very real consequence of his climbing. So, so I'm going to try to get through this without like blubbering like a moron. But, to the point of, we drop him off at the airport to go climb Denali. He's flying to Alaska and he may or may not come back. I'm not sure. Everest, kind of same thing. We've had discussions about, I went to base camp with him and, leaving him there at base camp for me to come back home and him to stay to finish climbing the mountain. Like, there was a very real chance that may have been the last time I was going to see him. And I know that that's not directly related to his hemophilia, his bleeding disorder, but, a little bit. It was still talking about death as a married couple. And also talking about it to the point of like, these discussions affected our choices for family planning. Natalie, you and I have had this discussion before that, Chris was very adamant that we not have kids until after Everest, or until after his climbing, because he didn't want to have that extra mental burden of being worried about not only a wife and parents that he would leave behind, but children as well. And so it's impacted our lives greatly. To be completely honest, we haven't really revisited the topic since he's finished his climbs. Like, whew, made it through that. Now what? Do we have like a normal discussion about morbidity and the potential of you dying? Like, we haven't gotten to that point yet. I feel like I don't know, maybe we've done enough of talking about that crap. I know, right? Yeah, next podcast. I don't know if that was helpful.
Well, I think it was totally, totally helpful. And it's just a hard conversation to have. And it feels extra loaded because it feels extra real. Where like the four of us just have almost equal chance probably of tomorrow not waking up due to anything. But like when there's a lingering condition, it's a little bit more like you talk about it, you think about it. But no one wants to talk about these topics. No one wants to think about these topics, especially with your best friend, your partner, the person you're like, I married you to like Notebook style this relationship, like last breath together, and you don't want to think about it or talk about it, but it looms. And then, interestingly enough, the more people I meet in the community, there's a lot of, I think of Chris specifically and Patrick specifically because I know them very well. But Chris with his extreme climbing, and Patrick, if anyone who's met him, like living life at speeds that are just really, really insane. I think I think both of those attributes come from this, I don't know if I have tomorrow, so I need to live life now and hard. And I think if we were, this wasn't something that came up, but if we talked to all the spouses and partners, that there is this theme of like, I got to do it right now. And how that also affects us as partners of like, where I'm like, slow down. Like, we can do it later. But like, he truly doesn't feel like that's there. And it feels good to know that there's other partners who are like, yep. Like, there was just so much yes-anding and like raising, snaps, raising our hands, nodding our heads of being like, oh my gosh, yes, other partners feel this like very real thing. It was a support group, this session. It was great. And then you brought up family planning. That wasn't brought up this morning. It was brought up really slightly by one gentleman who then changed it to, we're now moving to adoption. But family planning with bleeding disorders, there's a genetic element, and then there's also a timing element in terms of like, if there's a lot going on with this person, is this the right time to make this really big shift? Does anyone want to speak to that? Or you have a child, Susan. Do you feel comfortable speaking into how that went into that decision?
Yeah, there was a time when Dan and I thought we were going to adopt because we were having a lot of trouble finding information about how we could safely have a child given his HIV status. And long story short, we ended up just going about it the old-fashioned way without any bells, whistles, and major science, and had a positive outcome. We have a child, and it's really great. But I think that we worked through a lot of conversations around that, and timing was important. But I don't know if at that time we were having conversations about longevity. I think it was more about quality of life. I think that he would express, being a dad with a disability, what might that be, a physical disability or a medical concerns disorder was something that he was concerned about. I think that once we figured out how to have a child, we just got normal. We were just like normal people, just procreating, breeding, having babies. And it felt very normal. But I think we put so many years of effort into the research and the advocacy and working at the Sacramento State Capitol, changed some laws to make it possible. And there were so many things that we were doing to try to get ready for it that once we finally did actually, once I was finally pregnant, then it was like, okay, we're not special anymore. Now we're just like regular old people. I'm gestating here. And so it was like, but I think that we put so much effort into thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And it's like anything they say, there's no time is right. So you might as well just do it now or do it when you think it's right. And just grab the opportunity when you can. We can have another conversation another time about that because we did quite a bit of press about it. Back when HIV was a thing that people worried about.
So Rich and I obviously have a literal problem with trying to have a baby. So this is going to take a little extra work and planning on our end. And excuse me. We have had a lot of discussions about what is going to be the right way for us to acquire at least one, hopefully two children, is what we'd really like, and when is that going to happen? For us, it'll probably start next year as we get more serious about it. We're not getting any younger, although we're both very young right now, just for the record, for those of you who can't see me. But we have had some serious discussions about adoption. We've had discussions about surrogacy. Fostering has come into the play. I think we've decided that perhaps out of the three, adoption will be the best option for us. We have talked very seriously about adopting a child with hemophilia or with a bleeding disorder. That's not something that intimidates or scares us. We are part of a great support network that would be able to help take care of a kid with that condition. We're also not scared of, being, if we did do surrogacy, that's much more expensive. But if we did that, if the child was born with a bleeding disorder because of or was a carrier, we're into that. We'll just make sure to educate and deal with it as it comes. That's not necessarily our decision to make, but we will roll with the punches. And again, choose your own adventure and perspective, the two things I've said a couple times now. Those are really important. I will say that my brother-in-law and his wife, they had a son who was tested and didn't have anything. He's about 18 months old now, 2 years actually. And then they just had a daughter. And they were really bummed when they found out they were having a girl. Of course, now it's a total blessing and she's a total sweetheart. But it appears as though she is a carrier. And they were like, oh, man, they were really hoping to avoid that. And that was a really interesting discussion to hear them have. Rich and I kind of stayed out of it, although we did let them know that there are lots of, if things, depending on how this turns out with her, we can get you help or we can point you in the right direction or whatever. There's resources available. That's not an game changer, game ender. But it was watching them go through that process was very interesting because it was very different from what Rich and I conversations that we would have had. But again, everyone has different experiences, and that's kind of the beauty of this discussion we're having right now. And the discussion we had this morning is that diversity enriches all of us as we have these discussions and look into these perspectives. So.
Yeah, and like Susan said, I think this topic alone could be a standalone podcast, and there are many aspects, the genetic aspect, and then there's the aspect of comorbidity of, is this the right time because my person also has depression and anxiety, and that is a lot to handle in the marriage as well. Can I be pregnant during that? Do I want to be waking up with a newborn and then dealing with a bleed in the morning? And I don't want to use the term dealing, that there is a bleed or a depressive episode the next day and I have a newborn and a husband with a condition. And adoption and fostering and adopting someone with a bleeding disorder. So I do think that there is definitely way more here to talk about. We do need to wrap up, and it just like the conversation here has gone so many different ways. It just proves that there's so much to talk about. So this morning, the session was split up into 2 groups, those affected with bleeding disorder and the partners. And after we came through with these lists of these emotions and these feelings and these roadblocks that we all had, we shared them, the 2 groups shared. And one interesting takeaway from the other group before we wrap up was one of their concerns was our side saying, I get it, and them being like, but do you really though? And that was a really interesting thing for all of us to hear, because it's like, well, I feel like I get it way more than, Joe Schmo on the street would get it. But like, we don't have the condition. We don't live with the management of chronic pain or the identity of having a bleeding disorder. So it was really enlightening to see that on their list and hear that perspective, because at least for me, I get this arrogance in myself where I'm like, no, I get it. Like, but do I really though? So that was really interesting. I want to thank the 3 of you for joining me this afternoon again and having this lovely conversation. And it really inspired me to want to do more with this, because it feels so important and an underheard voice, and one that should be shared. So thank you so very much. And thanks again. This podcast would not be possible without the generous support of Shire. Thank you, Shire, for continuing to support the BloodStream Podcast. And that's all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, and our sponsor, Shire. Thanks as well to Ben Martin for being the share guest on this episode, and to everyone who spoke to us at the Bleeding Disorders Conference. Subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast, the Ask the Expert Podcast, the Powering Through Podcast, and the Bloodline Special Series Podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured in this episode. My name is Natalie Lynch, and until next time, take self-care of yourself.